Ruslan.
A feminist pastor decided to melt a ton of purity rings into a woman's body part. Yep, this is true. This story was sent to me by one of our Red Pill resident viewers who sometimes feel like I don't have equal opportunity for the goofy stuff that is done in the name of men and women, because I go too hard at the Red Pill. But that's all right. We'll cover it anyway. Check this out. This story is kind of nuts. And it's a couple years old, which makes sense why I didn't cover it, because I wasn't really active on YouTube back in 2019. But this is what happened. Feminist pastor unveils vulva sculpture made of old purity rings. Forewarning.
Hide your kids, hide your wife.
Explicit.
Months after Lutheran pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber issued a call for Christian feminists to send her their old purity rings, the once discarded jewelry has been completely transformed. The purity rings, symbols of an abstinent pledge, were melted or pounded down and reshaped into a sculpture of a vulva emerging from a throne of flames. Bolz-Weber, the progressive Christian theologian and writer behind the project, unveiled the sculpture on Thursday at the 2019 Conference for Makers. Now, before I show you guys this, let's just point out a couple of things. The first non-starter is that this is a feminist pastor who is a part of a progressive Christian theology. Okay. Apparently of a Lutheran church. Now, if you know anything about the mainline churches, you know that the mainline church is grossly bleeding members. Whenever you hear about the church shrinking and people aren't going to church, it's the mainline churches. It's the Lutheran, it's the Anglican, it's those churches, the mainline churches, the main denominational churches. And the only other one you would add into that is the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, the Southern Baptist Convention is also losing members heavily. So everyone else is not losing members the way these mainline churches are losing members. Okay, so that's for starters. Second of all, this is and you know who's losing the most amount of members? You know what churches aren't growing? Is progressive churches. Progressive Christianity is not growing. Christianity that's affirming of third, fourth wave feminism, Christianity that's affirming of the LGTB, those are not growing. Those churches are shrinking. So now on to the reveal. Here is what they molded everything into. It's a big vagina. All right, it's a big old vagina. Yep. Purity rings were a cultural phenomenon that emerged in certain evangelical communities during the 1990s and the 2000s. They symbolized a promise to abstain from sex until marriage, which is a good thing. By all empirical data and measurable accounts, it's a good thing. Critics argue that the rings and purity culture more broadly taught young people to feel shameful about their sexuality and suggested that a person's sexual thoughts and choices ultimately determine their spiritual standing in the eyes of God. Yeah, some people did that, but to be fair, a lot of men I knew, young men that I knew, also wore purity rings. Did it overcorrect? Yes. But what was the context? Folks were coming out of the 80s. Folks were coming out of STDs exploding, teen pregnancy exploding, right? So purity culture was an overcorrection of sorts. Purity rings in and of themselves, a symbol that I'm going to vow myself to celibacy, is not an overcorrection. It's just a symbol symbolizing it's literally a symbol saying I'm not going to engage in sexual immorality, right? There was also no room. Oh, of course, and this is where all this goes. Listen to this. Look at this. There's also no room for LGTB love within this theology. Oh goodness, you guys can't do anything without reminding Christians how homophobic the Bible is. can't do anything without reminding grace. See, it's like, it's not that your issue is with people pledging celibacy. The real issue beneath the issue is that. It's that you're upset because you want the Bible to be something that it isn't. You want Christianity to become something that it isn't. And anytime you goobers infiltrate these mainline churches to try to make them something that they aren't, and they actually, bend and contort to your will, the churches die. They die. Name me one affirming megachurch. They don't exist. Name me one affirming church that has over 1,000 people on a Sunday. They don't exist. These churches die. Might be something to that. Right? Now, Boltz Bieber was the founding pastor of House of All Saints and Sinners, a LGTB inclusive Lutheran congregation in Denver. Although she was raised in a fundamentalist Christian family, the pastor has become a prominent voice in progressive circles. The Vulva Sculpture Project, part of a promotion for Shameless, Boltz-Weber's recently published book about sex and Christianity, sought to prove the symbols of a harmful and patriarchal theology can be reclaimed. Boltz told Huffington Post purity rings transformation reminded her of the Bible verse describing a utopia where people beat their swords into plowshares. He shall judge among many people and rebuke strong nations afar, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations shall not lift up a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Respectfully, this is an overrealized eschatology. This is not a prophecy about us being in this utopian state on this side of eternity. That's not what that verse is. Let's see this. Let's read it. Isaiah says, "He will judge between the nations and settle disputes for many people. They will beat their swords into plow." By the way, plowshares is something that's used for harvesting crops. So this is actually a verse about going from spending a ton of money on like the military industrial complex to spending a ton of money in platforming entrepreneurs, which I'm pretty sure she has an issue with capitalism too, right? They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. This is an overrealized eschatology about something that isn't promised on this side of eternity, right? Unfortunately. It's actually a part of the tradition, okay? And so this is them melting this nonsense down. And then converting it to a massive vagina. Colorado-based artist Nancy was responsible for transforming the rings into a vulva sculpture. Boltz told the Huffington Post that they received about 170 purity rings from all over the country, many accompanied by notes revealing more about the people who had worn them. And there it is. Okay, so listen, I'm not saying that there aren't folks that have been negatively impacted by purity culture. Obviously, there are some people. You were told that sex is bad and sex is disgusting and sex is gross, and therefore you should save it until you're married. That's nonsense. I think this is all anchored on us having a terrible theology around pleasure, unfortunately. And I think it's an unhelpful view of pleasure, and that's where purity culture failed. Purity culture was also an overcorrection to a lot of the debauchery that was happening in the 80s, a lot of the teen pregnancies that were happening in the 80s, a lot of the, I would say, sexual positivity, I don't know what it was called, free love influencing churches in the 70s and 80s that then led to a lot of people catching STIs, catching STDs, young folks getting pregnant. And so it was an overcorrection of that. But to discard the idea that folks should wait until marriage to have sex is not only counterintuitive, it's also counter what the empirical data says. The empirical data says that the people who are happiest in a marriage and the least likely, both sexually speaking, and least likely to get divorced are actually virgins who practice their faith. Statistically speaking. Now, what you'll hear whenever this conversation comes up is you'll always have folks from the progressive end point out people who were the exception to the rule. They'll point out people that were exceptions to the rule. They won't tell you about the hundreds of thousands of Christians, probably millions of Christians, who love Jesus, are plugged into a local church. They were celibate, or maybe they slipped up a couple times, but they maintained a small number of partners, and then they got married, and now they're happily married. Now they have families. Now they're doing great, going to church, serving people, loving people. They don't tell you about the hundreds and thousands and millions of those people. They'll tell you about the handful of people that I did everything right, and unfortunately, well, you got divorced or something went left, and you didn't really. Your life didn't pan out. Those situations happen too, but they're far, far, far the minority and not the majority. The majority of people who wait until marriage before they have sex, stay committed, going to church, and if you factor in income just a little bit, those marriages tend to basically be the least likely to get divorced. That's what the data says. That's what the statistical data says. And so the need to push this sort of narrative, I think, is anchored in just a misunderstanding of what's actually in our best interest. If everyone, hypothetically, waited until they were married to enjoy intimacy, our entire world would be different. Our entire world would be different. If everyone waited until they were married to be intimate, our entire world would be different. Most of our issues would be alleviated. Most of our social issues would be alleviated. Fatherlessness would be alleviated. STDs and STIs would be alleviated. The termination of babies will be alleviated. Broken families will be alleviated. Right? If we just did that aspect of it. But we rather tell people to live their true self, be their true self, live their best life, practice their truth, and all that other nonsense. This notion that like telling people to wait till marriage is bad or oppressive or unhelpful is just nonsense. It's just not true. The data just doesn't show that. It's just not true. And I think we should call this stuff out, right? I think we should call this stuff out. And not just like the actual action, but like the ideology driving the action. There's an ideology behind this. It's an ideology rooted in the sexual revolution and body positivity and sex positivity and hookup culture and all this nonsense, right? And so I think it's a great discipline in terms of not being promiscuous until you're married. I think ideally, you are graduated high school, working full time, and are in a position to be mature enough to get married in a perfect scenario. I think ideally that is what we're hoping for in terms of these sorts of situations, because you also don't want to get married too young and not be in a position where you can provide and take care of yourself and that sort of thing. Guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you want to go and partner with us to keep us to help us continue making videos like these, podcasts, after party streams like this one, completely unedited, okay, that goes offline after we finish them. You can watch them every single day on our online community. Keep us independent, keep us brand free, only answering to you, so we never, ever have to make goofy commercials like these.
Our friends at Genucel Skincare have exciting news to celebrate in 2023.
Using Manscaped during my showers after workout has given me much more confidence.
And that's where Mud Water comes in.
True Classic has got your back.
All thanks to the sponsor of today's video, SayMine.com.
Established Titles is your opportunity to earn the title of Laird or Lady. Subject to credit approval, rates range from 7.99% APR to 19.99% APR, included 0.50% auto pay discount.
If you don't want us to make ads with brands you don't care about, sign up for our online community for as little as $5 a month to keep us independent and ultimately answering to you as our boss. You get all sorts of benefits like daily replays of our after party streams, exclusive access to our Discord community, and early access to our podcast interviews, all starting for only $5 a month.
Kingstream Entertainment. Ruslan